Welcome to the Default Profitable Podcast. You're listening to the next episode. Today we're going to focus on what it takes to start, run, and grow a business in marketing. We'll be talking about some successes, some failures, and some stories. I'm your host, Matt Nettleton, and today my guest is Jay Balunas with Angry Ape. Jay, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No problem. So we've known each other kind of intermittently in passing for years now, but why don't we do this? Why don't we take 2 or 3 minutes to introduce yourself and your company to everybody that's listening?
Okay. So my name is Jay Balunas. My company is Angry Ape Creative. A lot of people just call it Angry Ape, but I wanted to put the creative on there to help people understand that it's creative, because Angry Ape doesn't really mean a ton to people. And I do all kinds of creative stuff. So I do websites, logos, branding, photography, a little bit of video, print, digital, pretty much anything somebody needs in the creative space, marketing, or design.
All right.
I started my business I think it was in about 2010. So it's been 13, almost 14 years.
Okay. And so obviously I'm going to ask the next question, which is, why in the world would you start your own business?
So for me, I kind of just fell into it. And we talked about this a little bit before, but I got laid off from my last job, and I had started developing my logo. I was still at that job because I was going to start freelancing on the side. It's something I'd been thinking about for a while that I really needed to just jump into. And so I started creating my logo and kind of was already set up for it, but then I got laid off and just kind of rolled into it. My intention was to find another full-time job, but I was going to different networking meetings. Actually, I was part of an Adobe user group that I ran, and then somebody in that group introduced me to one of his friends who needed a logo, and then he invited me to a networking meeting. I didn't do any networking before that, but it just kind of all rolled into place, and then I quit looking for a job and just kind of started my own thing.
So when did you realize that you were self-employed?
I guess it was probably a couple months in. So when I got laid off, I had a good compensation package when they laid us off. So the last place I worked was the Finish Line. They have their corporate office here in Indy, and I got laid off, and I don't remember what it was, but I just remember it was pretty good, because I had somebody in my networking group ask me, like, how are you making money? Like, how are you paying your bills? I was like, oh, I got a really good compensation plan that I'm still able to live off that. And so, because I wasn't killing it when I first started. So if I didn't have that, it would probably have been a lot more difficult.
All right. So you get laid off and you start looking around for a job, but while you're looking for a job, you already kind of have your side hustle set up. So you might as well take some meetings, see if you can do anything. You started to make a little bit of money.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't charging very much, because I didn't know what the climate was here in Indy. I had no idea even what to charge people. That's still something that I sometimes struggle with, is pricing, trying to figure out because people sometimes tell me I'm too high. Some people tell me I'm too low. So you never get that right. So I just kind of rolled into it. I thought I was going to do a lot more. I was going to focus on designing logos. That was what my plan was, to design logos and branding for people. Quickly realized that, I needed to do more than that. So my background was a lot of publishing. So I did some of that, but started doing more websites, and just kind of across the board doing a lot of different things.
So as you go out, you get laid off, you start picking up some stuff. When was the first time that you sat down and made a business plan?
That probably wasn't for a year or two in. Like I started, and I really had a job. I didn't really have a business. I had a job, and sometimes I feel like I still have just a job. that's one of the things that I think is really important, is having that plan. And so I just kind of got into it. And so I didn't really have a plan. I was just doing work. And it's hard when you're doing the work and trying to run the business. I was listening to some of your previous podcasts, and somebody was definitely talking about that, how she was doing the work but running the business as well, and that's really hard. Um, it's hard to do, and it's hard for me to move out of that space. I think being a creative, I feel like I have to have my mark on everything, or it all has to be done by me. Um, and I still struggle with that.
One of my good friends is a creative, and he started his own company, and he spent over $1,000 on 8 versions of business cards to get started. Because every time he got the finished product, he's like, "No, it's not, it's just not quite right." And finally, we were looking at him, going like, "Hey, how about you just use the ones you got? Like, it'll
Yeah,
be good enough."
yeah.
So,
I learned from a guy named Nick Carter, who's a
yep,
local entrepreneur here in Indy, and he was one of the people who kind of inspired me. He came and spoke at one of my at my Adobe user group, and that it all kind of happened really fast. I spoke to him. He was in the same networking group that this other guy introduced me to, and so I went to one of his things. But one of his um, phrases that he says a lot is just ship.
yes,
When you're building an app or a website or something, you can finesse it to death. Eventually, you just have to just ship and get that product out there. And you can always go back and fix it and modify and stuff. And so that's something I've tried to hold in the back of my head all the time. Is when I'm getting too much into the weeds and too detailed, sometimes you just got to just ship it.
yeah, yeah. And for some people, it doesn't matter as much. For creative types, where you have an eye for design and detail, it matters a ton.
Right.
Now, for other people, it can be an operations thing. I've had clients who are plumbers, and they found themselves just kind of wasting time doing things a specific way that nobody was asking for. So,
Yeah.
you know, everybody's got their thing, right?
Yep.
So when you started, you had always done this for a job. You decided to hang your own shingle out because you needed the money while you were looking for another gig. Are you passionate about marketing or interested in marketing?
I'm passionate about like being creative and coming up with ideas and helping people. So I've always been into design. So I went to school, I went to Purdue, studied visual communication design. So I actually am doing what I went to school for. I got into it probably when I was in high, like ever since I was a little kid. I was always creating things, making things, drawing, painting, all that kind of stuff. It wasn't until I was in maybe a sophomore in high school that I realized you could actually do it for a job, and not be a starving artist. They used to call it commercial art.
Right.
And so I found out about that, and then I kind of pursued that, because before that I thought I was going to go into something dealing with science. I was interested in science, and so yeah, I've always been interested in it, and in the design aspect. That's the one thing that I wish I would have. Well, two things. I wish I would have listened to my dad a little more. He was always trying to get me to take more business classes, or take some business classes, and take some more marketing classes in college. And I took one marketing class in college, but I always, at that point, I thought I'd be a graphic designer working for a company. Um, I didn't need business and all the other things, which I wish knowing what I know now, or where I am now, I wish I would have taken those classes.
Well, which is interesting because you know, when you look back 14 years, most businesses don't make it 14 years. What do you wish you knew when you had started?
I think this goes for any business, is just to realize that everybody wants a little piece of your pie. Like, I see a lot of businesses do this. They spend money on things, a lot of things, quickly, and then their cash flow dries up so fast, and they go out of business, because they're spending it on. Like, I did ads in Yellow Book. I mean, nobody was looking at anything at the time. I just met somebody, um, who sold ads for Yellow Book, and it sounded good. Then there was a couple of trade organizations, um, that I got involved with, where basically trading services, and then they have their own like dollars, and it can work for some people, but I didn't spend a lot of money or spend a lot of on a lot of things, so it never worked out for me. Some people that works out great, but everybody always wants a little bit of what you have, and then you can run out of money really quick. So that would be one thing I'd warn myself about, and I do warn new people starting businesses that, hey, be careful where you spend your money, because you could quickly run out, and you feel that you have all these things that you've never used or that haven't really got you anywhere.
What is it that when you think about what your dad told you about taking some more business classes, what do you think you would have picked up in there?
Well, how to run a business. It's
just in general.
Yeah, that was what I never realized, is that, I was always working for somebody else. So they were giving me the work, and they were paying my paycheck. And so you have to know the finances and where you're spending your money, what, like, the profits and loss, all those things that go into running a business, that I think I would have benefited from learning some of that and having that idea like ahead of time. I think would have helped a lot.
Yeah, I think of all I think you're about the 107th, 106th episode. I think of all the episodes, I would say at least half of them, the business owner makes the point that business finance and personal finance are two different things.
Right.
And knowing how to balance your own checkbook is not the same as knowing how to run a business. All right. So somebody comes to you and they work for a big company like Finish Line. And they're like, hey, I'm thinking about setting up a side hustle and doing this on my own. Do you encourage them or do you discourage them?
I encourage them. I encourage everybody to have a side hustle. So I actually also teach. I teach at Ivy Tech. I teach design classes, just usually one class a semester. But I tell all my students, be prepared, especially with their skill set. You can have a side hustle. Be freelancing a little bit on the side, just so that if you're working for someone full time, if you get laid off, you can have something going. You can easily pivot. I think the job climate right now, younger people tend to change jobs more often, but people get laid off a lot. Like with the pandemic, tons of people got laid off, and if they were in a position to have a side hustle or freelance, they were better off. They could keep their income going. So I encourage people to at least start a side hustle, if not do it full time. But I would say, if you're going to go out, don't shingle out there, start your own full time business. Just be prepared a little bit. Have a plan going into it.
So, like your plan?
A little better than my plan, but
which is probably, of all the episodes, the number two thing is pretty much everybody says, I wish I had actually had a coherent plan.
Right.
Followed behind, I wish my plan, which was coherent, had been somewhat accurate, because the people that make plans end up not really getting them. So when you look back, right, if 2024 Jay could sit down at a bar next to 2010 Jay the night before you open, and you can say, hey, listen, everything turns out fine, you'll be okay, but there's a lot of things you could choose to do tomorrow. Here's the one thing you need to spend the most time on and focus on first. What would that one thing be?
Get a process in place. Process like for your entire business, how it runs, so that you can work with other people. So I don't have any employees, but I've worked with some freelancers and some other companies to do some of the work. And I'm struggling with that actually right now. I'm trying to figure out how to give a project to this company so they can help me out. So I'm talking to the client, and I need them to help me with some of the back end more complex website stuff. And I wish I would have already had this in place, so that when I came to the situation, I was already easily able to roll into it. So planning a process, knowing how you do your work, and being able to tell that to somebody else.
And that's interesting, because the book that you recommended was the E-Myth,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
so there's two big concepts in the E-Myth. The first one is very few people get into business intentionally, entirely. They have an entrepreneurial seizure. All of a sudden, they're like, hey, now I have a business. And the second thing is think about everything in your business that can be done and decide whether or not it should be done and by who, which is really just the process piece.
Right.
Knowing that you read that book and that that's the one you recommend, if you were going to give yourself a letter grade for how well you've implemented the ideas, what would your letter grade be?
I'm probably a B minus. Like I so when you asked for that recommendation, I was like, oh yeah, I need to go reread that book again.
Yeah.
I have it's as an audiobook, and I listened to it a couple times, and so I need to just sit down, and I actually have a physical copy of it too. So maybe I should just sit down and read that version to really get focused on it, because it's one of those things where I come back to it occasionally and I'm like, yeah, that's what I need to do, and then life gets in the way, and I don't always follow what I'm supposed to do.
Well, and I guess the reason I asked the question that way is because you've been in business for 14 years. You've been relatively successful. You've done well. Your business is growing. You're expanding. You're using outside contractors to complete work. But I think it would be fair to say that if somebody else were to look at your business, they would not go, "Oh my gosh, he's read the E-Myth. I can tell by the way the business is run."
Right.
Right. This is running a business is not a book report test where if you don't get an A, you're doing it wrong. Running a business is, yeah, I'm probably a B minus. I can live with that. It could be better, but I can live with a B minus.
Right.
So I think that should be almost an encouragement to other people that it's okay to do some parts of the business good enough. You can always improve them later, but don't get hung up on it's got to be perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a big thing, is like, I know there's a ton of stuff I can still improve in my business. And I don't get it right. I've tried some of these things, I've tried to implement a few times and just didn't get it done. But if you can take a step back and look at your business every once in a while, be like, okay, get an overview of, okay, what am I doing? What do I need to do? What did I say I was going to do? That's really helpful.
Yeah, that's pretty good advice. So any other, it's a quick 20 minutes, but any other advice for a first time or new business owner, aspiring new business owner?
I'm a little biased here, but I would say get your brand and marketing like in order. You don't have to do a ton of stuff, but I would have like the name of your company and your logo. So typically the first things I tell a company is get your name, your logo, website, business card, and then you're pretty set. But you want to be thinking about the name of your business. Is it something people are going to remember? Can you get the social media handles? You want to get them all to match, so it has to be short enough for whatever you do. So there's a lot of pre-planning, I think, that goes into a business people don't think about. A lot of times they'll start a business and they'll name it, and then somebody else has that name, or there's a name similar. So taking a little time to pre-plan that kind of stuff is really helpful.
Yeah, and it's really fundamental. Like,
yeah,
nobody thinks somebody else is going to have their name. Nobody else thinks somebody else is going to have, their Twitter handle or their Instagram handle. One of my favorite podcasts, the guy, he was not able to get his name and he was not able to get the real version of his name. Like, so it was, and he ended up with some weird handle, and everybody was making fun of him because they're like, what are you thinking? Like,
right.
There's got to be a way to do this better than, having 4 digits at the end of your Twitter handle. That doesn't make any sense. So,
yeah. I tell people to plan out, come up, like sit down, or maybe I'm coming up with a name for them or helping them. I'll come up with a list of possible names. Sometimes I'll sketch out logos at the same time, but then I'll see if the website's available. and the main social media handles. And if one's not, then you have to think about what is it worth it. If you can't get the Twitter handle, is it worth keeping that name? And then like for my business, it's crazy. There's a lot of people that want to use the name Angry Ape for stuff. And I've had people contact me. They want to use my logo, or like somebody that has asked me if they can use my logo to create shirts for their clients. I was like, no. Somebody wanted to use my name for a business called Red Gorilla Marketing. And so before I told them no, I went and registered that domain. So I try to protect my property, my IP,
Right.
is my name. So I have probably a good 20 domains around Angry Ape Creative. So I think people need to think about that before they get started. How deep do they want to go? But can you get the name, and then can you protect it?
Yeah. All right. Well, that's pretty tactical advice to close on. So that's actually pretty good. Listen, before we wrap up, I want to remind everybody that's listening, you can find out more about Jay and his company in the show notes at defaultprofitable.com. And as a listener, there's 3 ways you can help us. 1, you can leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. 2, you can hit subscribe so you get new episodes. And 3, you hear something interesting, share the episode with somebody you know. Jay, thanks. It took a while for us to get this together, but I appreciate jumping on here. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
And for our listeners, we'll be back next week with another episode of Default Profitable. Until then, stay focused, keep working, stay profitable.